Henry Blake was boarding his private jet when he saw a little girl crying on the airport floor. Minutes later, he missed his flight, and nothing in his life was ever the same again. Henry Blake sat in the airport's VIP lounge with his legs crossed, his laptop open, and a noise-canceling earpiece tucked into his left ear. His pale gray suit was flawless, his blonde hair neatly combed back, and his sharp blue eyes focused entirely on the numbers flickering across the screen. He was a man who didn't waste time, not on small talk, not on travel delays, and certainly not on strangers. His life operated on efficiency, flights, mergers, strategy, silence. The outside world, with all its chaos and emotion, was kept at a controlled distance. But today, something broke through that distance in the most unexpected way. As his boarding group was called over the intercom, Henry reached for his briefcase and stood. Just as he turned toward the gate, a sound stopped him. It wasn't loud, just soft, stuttering sobs, but in the sterile quiet of the lounge, it was unmistakable. He looked toward the source. Near the edge of the seating area, a little girl was sitting on the polished floor, curled up beside a small white bag and a worn stuffed bunny. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Her white dress looked slightly wrinkled, and her curly blonde hair framed her face in soft, tangled strands. Tiny white clips barely held the hair back from her pale forehead. Her shoulders shook as she cried, trying to muffle the sound into the bunny's fabric. People were watching. Some glanced, some frowned, but no one moved. No one asked. No one helped. Henry hesitated. This wasn't his problem. His plane was boarding, his schedule was packed, and he had already lost 3 minutes. But his feet didn't move toward the gate. They turned instead toward her. He knelt slowly, loosening his tie slightly, unsure why he felt nervous. "Are you lost?" he asked, keeping his voice calm and low. The girl looked up with wide, glassy blue eyes that mirrored his own more than he realized. She sniffled, clutched the bunny tighter, and shook her head. "Mommy went to the bathroom and didn't come back," she said. "She told me to stay here." "I did, but she didn't come back." Henry looked around. No adult nearby seemed even remotely connected to the girl. There was a small pink jacket folded on the seat behind her and a woman's handbag beside it, but otherwise nothing. He frowned, reaching for his phone. "What's your name?" he asked, already pulling up security services. The girl answered softly, "Lily." The name hit him like a slow, quiet punch, familiar in a way that made his stomach twist. As he spoke to the airport staff and they began checking security footage, Henry stayed near her. He offered her water, which she refused. He asked if she wanted to sit on a chair. She said no. Her mother had told her not to move. She obeyed perfectly. An hour passed before security came back with footage. A woman, blonde and thin, holding Lily's hand, entered the restroom area. No footage showed her leaving. Eventually, after a search, she was found unconscious in a service hallway behind the restrooms. Overdose. Emergency services arrived. Henry heard the paramedic mention the name on her ID and stopped breathing for a second. Melanie Brooks. He hadn't heard that name in nearly 6 years. But it wasn't a name you forget, not when it belonged to the only woman who ever got under his skin, then vanished without a trace. Melanie. And now this little girl, Lily, sitting on the floor in front of him, was her daughter. He watched her as she picked at the fur on her bunny's ear. The tears had dried, but she still looked terrified, hollowed out by confusion and something more ancient than any child should feel. Henry couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when a long-buried name had just taken on a face. He sat down beside Lily and said gently, "You don't have to wait alone anymore." He missed his flight, and for the first time in years, he didn't care. Henry didn't take Lily home right away. Instead, he arranged for a private hotel suite near the hospital where Melanie had been admitted. The staff had tried to offer alternatives, a social worker, a temporary shelter, but Henry refused them all. There was no hesitation in his voice when he said he would be responsible for the child. The moment he heard Melanie's name, a part of him that had been buried deep under years of control and emotional detachment snapped awake, and he knew, without evidence or explanation, that Lily was his daughter. He couldn't prove it yet, but his instincts had never spoken so loudly. Lily clung to her stuffed bunny as they rode silently in the back of his black car. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just stared out the window with wide, unblinking eyes. Occasionally, she would glance at Henry, but she didn't ask questions. She had the look of someone who had learned to stay quiet and invisible. Henry, watching her through the mirror, felt something tight settle in his chest. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. When they reached the hotel, he gently led her inside. The staff recognized him immediately. Mr. Blake was a known figure in the business world, and offered their best suite. He asked for a quiet floor, room service on standby, and absolute privacy. Once inside the suite, he showed Lily the bedroom, the television, the balcony she wasn't allowed to go out on without him. She nodded to everything, not really reacting, as though her body was present, but her mind was floating elsewhere. He ordered her a warm dinner, something simple, a grilled cheese sandwich and soup. She sat at the edge of the couch and ate with small, careful bites, still holding the bunny with one arm. Henry sat across from her with a plate of untouched food. He watched her more than he spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you remember your mom talking about someone named Henry?" he asked. Lily looked up, a piece of bread paused in her hand. She thought for a second, then nodded slowly. She said he was someone from before. Someone she missed, even when she didn't say it. Henry felt the air go still. Melanie hadn't just disappeared. She had carried a part of him with her. And now that part was sitting across from him, quiet and unsure, needing someone who didn't vanish. He tucked her into bed that night, awkwardly at first. He wasn't used to brushing small teeth or finding the right storybook voice. She chose a picture book from the hotel's children's selection, and he read it stiffly until she interrupted him halfway through and whispered, "You don't have to be good at it. Just don't stop reading." He didn't. After she fell asleep, clutching her bunny and breathing in soft patterns, Henry stepped into the other room and made a call. A private medical lab he had used before, discreet and fast. He requested a DNA test. He gave his own sample immediately and arranged to have Lily's collected in the morning, gently, without frightening her. He knew he could wait for answers, but in his gut, he already had them. He stood by the window of the suite for a long time, watching the dark city move beyond the glass. His phone buzzed with messages from his assistant, his board, his lawyers. He ignored them all. Nothing in his perfectly structured empire felt as important as the tiny girl asleep behind the door. The pieces didn't make sense yet, but the weight of it had already settled in his bones. Whether the test confirmed it or not, Henry knew one thing with absolute certainty: he wasn't leaving her. Not now. Not ever. The DNA results arrived in less than 48 hours. Henry hadn't told Lily about the test, not because he wanted to hide the truth, but because he knew that labeling what they already felt wouldn't change how he was treating her. Still, when the envelope arrived by private courier, his heart beat harder than he expected. He opened it alone, standing at the desk in the hotel suite study area while Lily watched a cartoon quietly in the next room, her bunny still never far from reach. The result was printed in clear, clinical language: 99.9% probability of paternity. Henry sat down slowly, the page trembling slightly in his hands. He was her biological father. It was now a fact, not just a feeling. The weight of that knowledge didn't bring relief as much as it brought clarity. He hadn't just stumbled into someone else's crisis. He had found his child, and she had been alone in the world for far too long. He thought about all the years he'd spent chasing perfection, his reputation, his empire, his image. While his daughter had been growing up without him, with no idea who he was or why he had never come. The guilt didn't hit him all at once, but it seeped into every thought, quiet and steady, reshaping everything. That afternoon, he picked her up from where she sat drawing on hotel stationery and asked if she wanted to go for a walk. She nodded. They walked through a nearby park in silence for a while, Lily holding his hand but still keeping her gaze down, the way children do when they don't yet trust that the world will remain kind. Eventually, she stopped and pointed at a small bench by a fountain. They sat together, and after a long pause, she asked, "Is Mommy going to die?" Her voice wasn't dramatic or frightened. It was calm, resigned, too heavy for someone her age. Henry didn't lie. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But the doctors are doing everything they can to help her." She nodded. "She told me once that if something ever happened to her, I should find someone named Henry. But I didn't know how. I just waited." She looked up at him for the first time with something like hope, not trust yet, but the start of it. "Are you him?" "Yes," he said, his voice catching. "I am." She leaned against him without another word, her small shoulder resting against his chest like she was testing to see if he was real. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stayed there, letting her decide how much closeness she could take. It was an affection that struck him then, all somehow. She had found her way to him without even knowing it. Later that evening, back at the hotel, he contacted his legal team. He needed to begin the process of formal guardianship immediately. With Melanie unconscious and unable to provide consent, it would take paperwork, hearings, background checks, and court approval. He didn't care how long it would take. He would do it right. He also reached out to a child psychologist, arranging for an evaluation and emotional support for Lily in the coming days. He wanted her to feel safe, not just fed and housed. He wanted her to know she mattered. She had gone too long surviving. Now she deserved to begin healing. That night, when he tucked her into bed, she turned toward him and asked, "Will you still be here tomorrow?" The question came out softly, almost like a whisper she was afraid to believe in. "I'll be here every day," he said. "As long as you want me." She didn't answer right away. But then she nodded once, closed her eyes, and reached out with one hand to hold on to his sleeve as she drifted to sleep. Henry didn't move. He sat there beside her, still wearing his suit jacket, her fingers curled in the fabric, and he understood something he never had before. He wasn't rescuing her. She was saving him, too. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm, quiet but meaningful. Henry extended their stay in the hotel suite while renovations quietly began in his penthouse to prepare a permanent home for Lily, one with a bedroom designed just for her, soft lighting, safety latches, and space for toys and books she hadn't yet picked. But until that space was ready, he did his best to make the hotel feel like more than just a temporary shelter. Lily adapted quickly to the quiet luxury of their surroundings, not in the way of a child dazzled by wealth, but with the quiet gratitude of someone who had been cold before and now felt warmth. She asked few questions, never demanded anything, and often looked to Henry for silent permission before doing even the simplest things, like reaching for a juice box or turning on the television. It broke something in him every time she hesitated like that, as though kindness was still something she hadn't learned to trust. He made it his mission not just to care for her needs, but to offer presence, the kind that didn't expect anything in return. He read to her every night, even when he had meetings that ran long or calls that waited unanswered. He began waking up early, not to review financial reports, but to learn how to braid hair by watching online tutorials so that when she asked, he could get it almost right. The first time she smiled wide enough to show her front tooth missing, he realized it was the first full smile he had seen from her. Their conversations grew longer and more personal. She told him about her bunny, which she had named Sky because it was the same color as the sky she used to see through her bedroom window when she was scared at night. She shared that her favorite food was pancakes, but only if they were soft in the middle, and that she was scared of hospitals, not because of needles, but because she had once waited in one for hours without knowing if her mother would ever come back. Henry listened to everything. He didn't always know what to say, but he never dismissed a single word. The more she opened up, the more fiercely protective he became, not just because she was his daughter, but because she was finally learning what it felt like to be heard. Meanwhile, Melanie remained unconscious in the hospital. Henry visited her daily, even if only for a few minutes. He sat at her bedside, told her about Lily's day, and updated her on the legal progress. He wasn't sure if she could hear him, but he spoke anyway, not out of obligation, but because part of him needed her to know that he was finally doing what he should have done long ago. He had no bitterness toward her anymore, only sorrow for the years they had lost, for the weight she must have carried alone, for the fear that had made her disappear. One afternoon, after a hospital visit, Henry brought Lily to a small bookstore. It was raining lightly outside, and she held his hand tighter as they crossed the wet pavement. Inside, the air smelled like paper and warmth. Lily wandered carefully through the children's section, her fingers brushing across covers like they were made of something fragile. She finally picked out a book about a fox who found its way home after being lost in the woods. That night, she asked Henry to read it twice. When he finished the second time, she whispered, "Do you think the fox knew where he was going?" He paused, then answered, "I think the fox didn't know, but he followed something inside him, and it led him to exactly where he was meant to be." She nodded as if that made perfect sense, then curled up under her blanket and drifted to sleep. The next morning, Henry received confirmation from his legal team. The petition for emergency guardianship had been approved. It was temporary, but it was official. He was now, in the eyes of the law, Lily's legal guardian. He folded the documents slowly, not because he doubted the outcome, but because holding them felt like holding a second chance with his own hands. When he told Lily the news, she didn't cheer or jump up and down. She simply smiled softly and said, "So now I get to stay." Henry knelt in front of her and looked into her eyes. "You never have to leave again," he said. And for the first time, she reached out without hesitation and hugged him, arms tight around his neck, as if she had been waiting her whole life for someone to say those words and truly mean them. The penthouse was ready within 2 weeks, transformed from a minimalist, sterile bachelor space into a place that could now be called a home. Gone were the chrome edges, the cold light, and the sharp silence. In their place were warm rugs, softer furniture, a kitchen that smelled like actual meals, and a bedroom down the hall that Lily chose every detail of, from the color of the walls to the shape of the nightlight. Henry had never cared about interior design beyond aesthetics, but now he found himself researching safe drawer locks, non-toxic paints, and the best bedtime books for 5-year-olds. His calendar, once filled with investment briefings and mergers, now included field trip dates, parent forms, and a daily reminder labeled, "Pick up Lily." Their first day in the new home was quiet but full of meaning. Lily explored slowly, taking her time to look at everything. Her favorite thing turned out to be a small window seat in the corner of her room where she could curl up with her bunny and watch the city lights come on at night. Henry watched her without interrupting, standing in the hallway as she touched the edge of a shelf and tested the softness of her blanket. It was the first time he saw her act like a child simply experiencing comfort, not survival. In the days that followed, they built new routines. Pancake Sundays became sacred, even when the pancakes came out uneven or burned. Henry learned to laugh when Lily smeared whipped cream on his nose. On weekday mornings, she insisted on brushing her own hair, then asked him to fix it after, which usually meant starting over, but pretending she had done most of the work. Evenings were spent with coloring books, simple puzzles, or reading together. Lily had a quiet sense of humor, and she started to let it show more often. Tiny smirks, sarcastic observations far too advanced for her age, and the occasional giggle fit that ended in hiccups. Henry had never known how much joy could come from a child's laugh until he heard hers echoing through his once silent apartment. But not every moment was light. One evening, as Henry was finishing dishes, he found Lily crouched behind the couch, shaking. When he reached her, she wouldn't speak, just held her bunny tight to her chest. Eventually, through choked whispers, she said she had spilled juice on her rug and thought she would be punished. Henry sat on the floor beside her, not touching her yet, and asked gently who had punished her for accidents before. She didn't answer, but the way she flinched told him everything he needed to know. He told her firmly but softly that in this home, mistakes were allowed, and no one would ever be hurt for being human. She stared at him as if trying to measure whether she could believe him. He didn't ask her to. He simply cleaned the rug, handed her a fresh glass of juice, and kept the evening quiet. By bedtime, she had come to him and asked if he would sit beside her until she fell asleep. As weeks passed, Henry continued to visit Melanie in the hospital, though she remained unconscious. He brought her updates, pictures Lily had drawn, stories from their daily life, even silly anecdotes about burnt breakfasts. He talked to her like she could hear, like she might open her eyes any minute and see what had grown in her absence. He didn't know what would happen when she woke up or how she would feel about the new family forming in her shadow. But he knew one thing with clarity: he wanted to be there when she did. And he wanted to be the man who could look her in the eye and say, "I stayed." One evening, Henry received a call from his attorney confirming the court had scheduled a formal custody review. Though the temporary guardianship had gone smoothly, the presence of a living, though incapacitated, mother meant the court would need to assess everything before finalizing full custody. Henry wasn't surprised, but the weight of the process pressed on him. It would mean background investigations, psychological evaluations, more interviews with Lily, and most likely a social worker's observation of their life together. It would mean proving he was good enough, not as a CEO, but as a father. That night, when he sat beside Lily in her room as she fell asleep, he didn't read a book. Instead, he told her a story of a fox who got lost in the woods and kept walking because he believed someone was waiting for him at the end. Lily, sleepy but listening, asked, "Did someone wait?" Henry paused, then replied, "Yes. Someone had been waiting all along." She didn't ask who. She just smiled, closed her eyes, and whispered, "I think I'm the fox." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and said, "Then I guess I was the one waiting." And in that small, quiet room filled with soft light and the hum of the city below, it became more than just a temporary arrangement. It became something sacred, something worth protecting, no matter what came next. The morning of the court's family evaluation began like any other. Lily was up early, sitting at the breakfast bar in her pajamas, swinging her feet and coloring quietly while Henry made pancakes. She asked if she could help stir the batter, and he let her, even though she spilled flour across the counter. There was laughter, light conversation, and a rhythm between them that had taken weeks to build. But beneath the easy routine, Henry felt the pressure pressing behind his eyes. That afternoon, a court-appointed social worker would visit their home to assess the environment, observe their dynamic, and determine whether Henry's guardianship was healthy and in Lily's best interest. It wasn't about money or status. It was about trust, safety, and the invisible things that filled the space between a child and an adult who claimed to care. He had prepared meticulously. The apartment was spotless but still looked lived in, with drawings pinned to the refrigerator, a pair of small shoes near the door, and Lily's favorite books scattered gently across her bedroom rug. He didn't want perfection to scare the evaluator. He wanted authenticity. He dressed casually but neatly and told Lily that someone would be coming to visit them to see how they lived. She asked if she had to wear a dress, and he told her only if she wanted to. She chose a soft blue one and asked him to fix her hair. He braided it carefully the way she liked and tied the ribbon just right. When the social worker arrived, she was warm and professional, her eyes kind but observant. She greeted Lily first, kneeling to her level and introducing herself by her first name. Lily, shy but polite, invited her inside and offered to show her Bunny's favorite hiding spot. Henry stood back, letting her lead. The woman took her time, asking questions gently. What did Lily like to do after school? What made her feel safe? What did bedtime look like? Lily answered with quiet confidence. She spoke about pancakes and picture books, about their window seat talks, and how Henry made her laugh when he tried to sing lullabies off-key. Later, while Lily drew quietly at the table, the social worker asked Henry to step into the kitchen to speak privately. She reviewed the preliminary file, noting that Lily had shown signs of both resilience and past trauma but had improved in sleep patterns, emotional regulation, and school performance since coming into Henry's care. She asked about his history with Melanie, about why he hadn't known about the child before now, and about his motivations for pursuing full custody. Henry answered honestly, without rehearsed lines. He told her about Melanie's disappearance years ago, about how her sudden absence had left an unresolved wound in his life, and how finding Lily had changed everything. He didn't pretend to be perfect. He simply made it clear he was committed for life. The visit ended on a soft note. The social worker knelt once more beside Lily, who handed her a folded drawing. On it was a stick figure family of 2 people and a bunny holding hands beneath a giant heart. The caption read, in misspelled letters, "My home is here." The woman smiled and thanked her, then glanced back at Henry with an expression that said more than words could. She would file her report that night, but Henry already knew she had seen what mattered. The next morning, the court issued its preliminary review. The guardianship would stand, and the process toward full custody could proceed without challenge. Henry sat in silence when he received the email, the relief so overwhelming it felt almost hollow at first. He had been holding his breath for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to let it go. Lily was sitting nearby, playing with paper dolls. He walked over, sat on the floor beside her, and simply said, "They said yes." She blinked at him, confused. "Yes to what?" "Yes to you staying with me forever, if you want." She didn't answer with words. She crawled into his lap, rested her head on his chest, and whispered, "I already decided that a long time ago." That night, Henry couldn't sleep. He stood at the window, watching the city shimmer with distant lights, and thought about everything that had changed. He still visited Melanie daily, still spoke to her, even as machines hummed and monitors blinked steadily. He didn't know when or if she would wake, but if she did, he wanted her to know that Lily had not only been found but had been loved fiercely, fully, without condition. He turned to look back at the hallway where Lily's nightlight glowed gently under the door. A life that once existed only in theory, a concept he hadn't dared dream of, was now living, breathing, and fast asleep in the room next to his. And he knew, without question, that the court had only confirmed what his heart already understood: they were no longer waiting for permission to be a family. They already were one. Henry had just returned from Lily's school when he got the call from the hospital. It was short and cautious. Melanie had woken up. The doctor on the line warned him that she was weak, disoriented, and not fully coherent yet, but conscious. Henry stood in the middle of his kitchen, phone in hand, frozen. For a moment, the world around him blurred into silence. He looked toward Lily, who was sitting at the table, building a tower out of cereal boxes and carefully balancing her bunny on top. He didn't tell her right away. He didn't know how, but he packed her a small bag, called a trusted assistant to stay with her for a few hours, and headed to the hospital without hesitation. When he walked into Melanie's room, she looked smaller than he remembered, her skin pale against the sterile white sheets, her eyes fluttering slowly toward the window. The moment she turned her head and saw him, there was a flicker of recognition, not fear, not surprise, something quieter, maybe guilt, maybe resignation. He stepped closer, careful not to overwhelm her. She watched him, then whispered, "You came." Henry pulled up a chair and sat beside her. "I never stopped," he said. "You disappeared. I didn't know where. And now you're here, and so is she." Melanie closed her eyes for a moment, as if the mention of Lily was too much to hold. When she opened them again, they were wet with tears. "I didn't mean to disappear," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. "I was scared. I thought I'd ruin you if you knew. I didn't want to be someone else who took something from you." Henry shook his head slowly. "You didn't ruin me, but you did leave me out of the most important part of my life. And now she's everything. They sat in silence, machines beeping quietly beside them. Melanie's hands trembled slightly as she tried to reach for a cup of water. Henry helped her. She sipped, then said, "Is she okay? Is she happy?" "Yes," he said. "She's thriving. She's smart and strong and cautious, but she smiles more now. She laughs. She asks about you every night." Melanie pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. "I wanted to be better before I told you, but I never got better, and I didn't want her to grow up watching me fall apart." "You did what you thought you had to," Henry said. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore." Later that evening, he returned home to Lily, who ran into his arms the moment he walked through the door. She asked if he had gone to a meeting, and he hesitated before saying, "I saw someone very important." "Your mom." Her eyes widened, unsure whether to feel joy or fear. "She woke up," she whispered. He nodded. "She asked about you. She misses you." Lily clutched his hand tightly. "Can I see her?" Henry nodded again. "Soon, when she's a little stronger." In the days that followed, they spoke more often. Melanie's strength returned slowly. Henry visited her daily, updating her on Lily's routines, her favorite books, the way she hated broccoli and loved staying up too late. He brought her drawings, voice messages, even photos. Melanie wept the first time she heard Lily's voice say, "Hi, Mommy. I hope you're okay." "I'm okay. Daddy takes care of me." It was the first time either of them had heard her call Henry that aloud, Daddy. Eventually, Henry asked Melanie what she wanted for Lily's future. Her answer came without hesitation. "I want her to have peace, and I think you give her that. I'll never ask you to give her back. I just want to be whatever part of her life she'll let me be." Henry felt something shift in that moment, not closure, not quite forgiveness, but a kind of understanding. They had both come through pain and shame and uncertainty. And now they stood different, changed, but still willing to do what mattered most, love the same child in the best ways they could. That weekend, Henry and Lily sat in their apartment and put together a scrapbook. She carefully glued photos of them baking cookies, her first day at school, her stuffed bunny beside the window seat. Then she took a blank page and said, "This one's for Mommy." And Henry smiled, knowing they were making space, not just for the life they'd built, but for the ones they were still finding room to welcome in. On a warm Saturday afternoon, nearly 6 months after that day in the airport, Henry stood in the living room with his sleeves rolled up and a nervous energy pulsing just beneath his usually calm surface. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, lighting up the hardwood floors and casting gentle shadows across Lily's colorful artwork hanging in mismatched frames. Everything about the space was different now, no longer the home of a man who lived alone, but the home of a family. The scent of fresh lilies and something sweet baking in the oven lingered in the air. In the other room, Lily was carefully arranging her stuffed animals in a row on the couch, all of them facing the hallway as though preparing for a ceremony. She was wearing a white dress with soft blue flowers and had insisted on tying her own shoes, crookedly but proudly. Today was the day the adoption would be finalized. The papers had been signed, the court had approved everything, and all that remained was a simple in-person visit from a court officer to verify that Henry still intended to go through with the formal process. It was mostly symbolic, a last check before the document would be sealed and official. But for Henry, it felt like something much more. It felt like the final brick in a foundation he had spent months, years, really, building without knowing it. When the knock came at the door, Lily rushed to open it, her bunny tucked under one arm. The officer smiled warmly, greeted them both, and stepped inside with a clipboard and a light tone. The visit was short and pleasant, full of kind questions and even kinder remarks about how at ease Lily seemed in the home. After she left, Henry and Lily stood quietly in the center of the room. It was done. She was his, not temporarily, not conditionally, but officially, legally, forever. Lily looked up at him with her wide, thoughtful eyes. "So now I'm yours?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. Henry crouched down and placed both hands on her small shoulders. "You've always been mine," he said. "Now it's just on paper, too." She hugged him tightly, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, like a space that had finally been filled with something real. That evening, they invited Melanie over for dinner for the first time since she'd regained her strength. She had moved to a new apartment nearby and was in outpatient treatment, working through years of pain with steady progress. She arrived with a small bouquet of sunflowers and a cautious smile, unsure how the night would go, but hopeful. Lily greeted her with a drawing, herself in the middle, holding both Melanie's and Henry's hands, and led her to the table with the quiet confidence of someone who understood that love didn't have to be split. It could be shared. Dinner was simple: pasta, salad, and cupcakes that Lily had decorated with far too many sprinkles. They laughed, told stories, and looked at old pictures Melanie had brought of herself and Lily from years before. At one point, Melanie leaned across the table and said, "Thank you, Henry, for everything." "For her, for not walking away." Henry nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you for bringing her into this world. I'm just lucky I got to find her in it." Later, after Melanie left and Lily had fallen asleep, curled up beside her bunny and a new bedtime storybook, Henry stood in the doorway of her room, arms crossed, eyes damp. The soft glow of the nightlight shimmered across her face, peaceful in a way that made everything else fade. The court documents were on the desk behind him, neatly stacked and notarized. But he didn't need them anymore to feel what was true. He walked to the window and looked out over the city. The lights below flickered like distant stars, busy and cold. But here, in this space, this warm, lived-in home, he had found something far more lasting than success. He had found a purpose that didn't need recognition, a kind of wealth that didn't show up on spreadsheets. And as he turned off the last light and whispered good night to the quiet apartment, he understood fully what he had once been too afraid to admit. He wasn't just a man who had stepped into a child's life. He was a father, not by blood alone, but by every choice, every quiet promise, every moment of staying when it would have been easier to walk away. And that made him richer than he had ever dreamed possible. What makes the ending of this story so powerful is its quietness. There's no dramatic twist, no grand public gesture, just the steady, intimate triumph of love choosing to stay. Henry, a man once defined by control and detachment, becomes a father not through obligation, but through transformation, and that's what gives the story its depth. Lily isn't just a child in need. She's the catalyst that brings out the best in him. Her quiet resilience and trust teach Henry more about connection than any success ever did. The moment the adoption is finalized isn't the climax. It's the confirmation of everything that's already grown in between the silences, the late-night stories, the broken pancakes, and the gentle choices to keep showing up. For me, the beauty of this ending lies in how ordinary it is. One child sleeping peacefully, one man standing quietly in the doorway, knowing he's exactly where he's meant to be. It's not flashy. It's real. And sometimes, the most extraordinary endings are the ones built on simple, unwavering love.